Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. Excuse me. Let's pick back up with Erin M. Evans, The Gift of Guthix. Today we are going to be starting on Chapter 8. So hello and welcome. When we last left off, Ilme was traveling north to apologize to Gunnar for lying about being from the Moon Clan. The real Moon Clan mages arrived and revealed that the mages from the Wizard's Tower were lying to get access to the rune essence mine. And at the same time, in the court of Falador, the diplomats are arguing about how best to manage taxes and gifts to all of the different aspects and areas of Lord King Raddallan's kingdom, because he is now a king. Alright, so let's pick right back up. Chapter 8. The 42nd year of the reign of King Raddallan of Asgarnia. The 33rd day of the Ire of Thyrus, Fremnik province. Jarl Viljar refused to budge his stance all through the spring and summer months. He'd made a deal with the Asgarnian wizards. The deal he'd made with the Asgarnian wizards would stand. The mine was his to permit or refuse entry to, and he held no interest in listening to the Moon Clan's concerns. Still, Saldis and her attendants stayed with the Woolf Clan through the season, testing Jarl Viljar's hospitality, as Saldis made her nightly appeals to the Jarl's sense of honor, decency, and righteousness. Guthix made this error once before, so we are disrespectful to compound it, she said. The rune magic brought us to ruin. We shamed him and destroyed the world. The gods did the destroying, Viljar said, and it was your lot who brought the runes forth. The Wolf Clan didn't exist to perform your penances, mage. You are testing the bounds of my hospitality. Over and over, Viljar stubbornly refused to acknowledge his error. Over and over again, the Moon Clan dared his temper. Gunnar didn't return to the rune essence mine the whole season, unable to face Zoria and the lie the Guardian had known all along. He sent the letter he'd promised Zoria he would write Ilme, but the fury that seethed up inside him had made it impossible to find the words. How betrayed he felt, how confused, how he didn't know what would come next. The turbulence built and built in him like waves on the sea, building into winter storms of catastrophic tides and surges. Your father is risking the stability of the world, Saldis told him, as he pinned fish to the smoking racks along the seashore. You know what needs to be done. Gunnar looked up, stirring anger in him, stuck down in panic. Are you saying you've had a vision of me killing him? The old woman paused. I don't need to have visions to know what needs to happen, she intoned. She grounded her crozier into the sliding stone beach. He's not leading you as a Jarl should. The traditions were clear. A son succeeded the Jarl upon his death, but tradition was only a plan. History was littered with Jarls whose deaths had been helped along, and sons who'd snatched too quickly for their birthright, only to be struck down. He thought of Ott kneeling for the axe, of Riago sent against the wolf too hastily and without enough warriors. Gunnar turned to the broken surface of the sea, the salty wind stirring his hair. Viljar is still strong, he said. Guthix doesn't call him back to the earth yet. Saldis scoffed. The tools are in your hands, Gunnar Jarl, son. Don't blame this madness on the sleeping god. Before the season turned and the storms drove the Wolf Clan from the shore, the ship from the Lunar Isle returned. Viljar saw the Moon Clan off, as befitted a Jarl with departing guests, but the parting felt more like a bear chasing off a wolf that had strayed too close to its den. May you return safely home. May you return safely home, the Jarl declared, biting each word off, and carry only praises of the Wolf Clan with you. Theldis scowled at him. May you find the fortune you seek and reconsider your foolish choices. May your island be your resting place, he snapped back, and soon. The Wolf Clan would need to depart from their inland settlement soon, lest the winter storms that battered the shores wash their works away. The Fremennik had grown restless in the presence of a true Moon Clan. At least the wizards who had pretended to be the Moon Clan had been polite, if distant, and were only the faintest mimics of the eerie, silver-eyed mages who stared and proclaimed doom and would never leave. I don't know that I prefer them, Gunnar overheard Fronya say as they watched the mages leave. I think I'd rather have none of them, to be honest. At least they don't lie to us, Gunnar muttered. The warrior snorted. They're all lying, every magic user. Steel and iron are honest at least. Shame Viljar willing to let them laugh up their sleeves at us. Ivo Broken Tooth said, watching the Jarl giving directions to the fire tenders. A real Jarl would hunt those wizards down, make them wish they'd never lied. Your axe came from those wizards, Fronya pointed out. Ivo sneered. We can make our own weapons. We're not soft-handed foreigners. Or we weren't. He spat on the ground. Ott wouldn't be sitting on his own axe handle. Gunnar watched Ivo. Ilme's distant warning came back to him. Just a mage's sense, I guess. He seems to want the throne, worst. I suppose if you wanted to slip away before Ott did anything, he probably wouldn't chase you. She was never from the Moon Clan, he reminded himself. She was no sort of seer. She made that up too. Over and over, he turned through those memories, searching for lies, all the evasions. We're also not the trained mercenaries of the Lunar Isle, Fronya said. They don't tell us who our enemies are. You're young, Ivo said dismissively. You don't remember what we were before. He said he was still watching Viljar. If I were the Jarl, I would clean up this camp. But you won't be, Gunnar spoke up. Ivo looked back at him, eyes narrow. What was that? You're not going to be Jarl, Gunnar said, so it doesn't matter what you think. Ivo chuckled, coming to his feet. You're not going to be Jarl. A Jarl's got to have command, vision. A man has to be afraid of disappointing his Jarl, and we've all watched you disappoint Viljar from the day you were born. You couldn't even stand up to Viljar when he married off your girl. Cast your heirs to the other clans. No one fears you, Gunnar. You ought to go find that smug little seer who's been making a fool of you. Go see if the soft-handed foreigners would like a pissant Jarl for their troubles. The storm inside Gunnar swelled to a fury, a tide that washed up the shores of his self. He lunged at Ivo, axe first, all instinct and anger, the demand for a trial by combat chasing the urge to bury his axe in Ivo Broken Tooth's sneer. Ivo's own axe came up, blocking Gunnar's swing, but Gunnar forced it down, all that anger in his muscles now, and fear washed over Ivo's face as Gunnar kicked his heel into the soft point behind his knee and shoved his shoulder, knocking Ivo out flat. Gunnar, Viljar roared. What in the name of the dark witches of the wood are you doing? Stop it. Gunnar leapt back, again all instinct, but this time it was a cowardly boy, the disappointment of the Jarl, who reacted. The fear vanished from Ivo's face, and he smirked. Around his jagged smile, Ivo insulted him, Fronya called, eager and watchful. He was about to call, Suddenly, Viljar was on Gunnar, yanking away the axe. Don't you dare call for a trial on one of my warriors, he hissed. Ivo, get up, you lump of puke. You know what needs to be done, the Moon Clan's mage's words burned across Gunnar's mind. In that moment, he tossed on the storm of his humiliation. He wanted nothing more than to cut Viljar down. But Saldis hadn't seen it. She hadn't seen him defeat his father. She hadn't seen him become Jarl. He pulled the axe closer to his chest. That's what I thought, Viljar spat. All of you get to work. The storms are coming early, I can feel it. We leave at first light. Gunnar didn't follow them back to the settlement. No one seemed to care if he did. He watched Viljar walk away, sparing him no thought at all. And, unbidden, he remembered a long-off summer where he was still a young man, his beard soft, his axe unbloodied. Ilme had arrived, and his father had finally noticed Gunnar was spending a lot of time with the odd wizard girl. He'd warned him not to get ideas about a Moon Clan wife in various insulting and threatening terms. Right in front of Ilme. Your father is, Ilme had begun, letting the sentence dangle. A monster? Gunnar had suggested. I don't want to marry you. A mage wife sounds awful. I don't even think it. I wasn't thinking it. I don't want to marry anybody, Ilme said, let alone some Jarl's son. She watched Viljar stride off. I think he's afraid, she said, softer. I think he's afraid somebody will find out he's not ironed through and through. I think he's very afraid it's going to be you someday. But that's all a terrible excuse for treating you like a burden and a problem. I hope he regrets it someday. Gunnar had snorted. The Jarl doesn't regret things. Then I hope he lets you go, she said. You shouldn't have to wait around on him when you'd rather see the world, and he only makes you stay to be unpleasant. It had made him want to squirm away, the truth laid bare, and he'd covered it back up with all the things he'd owed the Woolf Clan, all the promises his birthright made him. He would be his brother's warrior, one or the other of them, and that was that. He was trying to drive you apart from them, he told himself, the anger churning up again. She was trying to break your resolve. Grief tried to poke its head above the waves of his anger, but he shoved it down. Ilme had known exactly what she was doing. And so did Viljar. Ivo wasn't wrong. Viljar had poisoned everyone against Gunnar, and now he was leading the clan to ruin, all for some weapons and his pride. What happened if he stood by his father? What happened if he brought him down? Something had to be done. Someone had to take steps. Up on the mountain, deep in the mine, Zoria waited. If Ilme wouldn't answer for her lies, if Viljar wouldn't take charge of the situation, then Gunnar would begin with the Guardian. All right, that was chapter 8. Let me get a little bit of water here. Relatively short chapter. And on to chapter 9. The 42nd year of the reign of King Raddallan of Asgarnia, the 34th day of the Ire of Phyrus, Fremennik Province. The approach of the Woolf Clan's summer encampment by land led the Asgarnians beyond the deep wilderness and up through the passes over the mountains. Autumn had settled over the hills like a red blanket. But up in the crossings, snow was beginning to fall. Ilme found herself grateful for the detachment of the Kinshra, who rode with her along with Master Indel, Master Urnaya, and Xanamoron. If she'd come alone, she wasn't sure she'd have made it. Not alone, she amended. Rue had come, of course, the little dragon always by her side, tucked under her cloak as the snow began to fall again. He poked his nose out. Cold. I can't do anything about that, Ilme said. Go home, he said, burrowing under her arm. You didn't have to come, she reminded him, but she bundled him into the folds of her robes. Xanamoron stomped up to her, bundled neatly as tightly as Rue. They really don't have any wizards. There's nothing to prepare against. Ilme shook her head. Just warriors. Very skilled warriors. But we shouldn't go in assuming we're going to fight. No one said we're blocked from the essence mine. As far as we know, the agreement is still in place. Xanamoron gave her a skeptical look. They brought me and not Iratona. They're expecting a fight. Ilme returned the look. You don't think that had more to do with the fact you can't be in the same room as Aziris without screaming at each other? Gunnar is hurt. It might be complicated. I don't think we're looking at a battle. Aziris and I are fine, thank you. We simply know each other too well, Xanamoron sniffed. Unlike you and the Jarl to be, a few dozen visits, a few dozen letters, and all that time you were playing a role. How could you possibly know him? Ilme shook her head. It doesn't matter. By the time we get there, they should have moved on to their winter camp. We may only be dealing with the Guardian. A part of her hoped that would be the case. She dreaded seeing Gunnar again as much as she hoped he would be there waiting for her. I know you lied. The first time she'd almost told him the truth, they'd been 28 and 25, an age where the gap between them had vanished, and the nature of their friendship settled and deep-rooted. His father had found him a wife the year before, a young woman from the Salmon clan called Feria, who was pleasant and quick-witted, and built a fine house each summer. And if she treated Ilme a bit like she was an old dog that had followed Gunnar in, she was kind at least, and never made the sort of fuss Viljar did. Take your friend up to the mountain, Fiera would say, when Ilme visited. Talk to the Guardian, and be back for supper in one piece, please. The summer after they'd wed, they had a baby, a little girl, and Fiera's pointed chin and Gunnar's pale hair, called Thyra. Gunnar put her in a sling. Fiera checked the knots a half-dozen times before letting them leave, and Thyra had gone up the mountains to Zezoria with them. I'm going to tell you something, Gunnar said to Ilme when the camp was out of sight and at last, and you can laugh. I can laugh if I want. I wanted to call her Ilme. She stopped short. The baby? Why? Because you're important to me, dummy. He looked down at the baby, prodding her to grab his finger. Nobody else ever stopped to notice me, all right? Nobody ever cared what I had to say. Not before I proved I could take on a giant on my own. I still have yet to see that. He scowled at her. Shut up. This is important, Fiera pointed out it wouldn't. It wouldn't go over well. My father... Well, anyway, she's Thyra, and she can't be your namesake, but I hope you'll still treat her like she is. All over again, she had been 16, trapped in a lie that squeezed more tightly around her by the moment. She thought of Valzen's admonishments, the advice to leap into the void rather than be caught. You don't know me, she wanted to say, but then that was a deeper sort of lie. She told all the truths that mattered to Gunnar. She took the little baby's hand. I would be honored. The second time she'd nearly told him was 15 years later, the summer after Fiera had died, a sudden fever leaving Gunnar and their daughter. Thyra, at 15, was budding into a bright and sturdy young woman, quick-witted as her mother and observant as her father. A valuable bride, Viljar had declared, to shore up their ties to the Salmon clan. She didn't want to go, Gunnar said dutifully. Of course she didn't, but there was no stopping my father. They took her anyway in the night. I failed her, and now I might never get to see her again. They're her mother's people, Ilme offered. They won't harm her, surely. Gunnar grew silent again, choked by grief. I already think of leaving all the time, he confessed. She was my only anchor to Viljar, and Viljar sunk her into the far-away harbor. If I chase my daughter, I will exile myself, and she won't be allowed to receive me without risking Viljar's wrath. He shook his head. I wonder some nights if I could run off and become a mage like you, hide away on the lunar isle, search the visions for a way to undo this somehow. He blinked up at her. Maybe you could see for me. And again, it wasn't right. None of this was right, but she could only think of that unburdening herself gave him more to carry, and his back was close to breaking. She will come back, she said instead. You're closer to her than I am to you. It just hurts right now. There was never a time the lie wouldn't hurt. There was never a time she could explain herself. She kept saying, not now, later, and later never came. He was going to be angry, and he was going to hate her, but she had to remember this was all so much bigger than her and Gunnar, as Garnia had too much to lose. Okay. When they reached the road that led down to the settlement, Viljar had, no, not Viljar. When they had reached the road that led down to the settlement, Valzin called a halt. I want to scout ahead, she said. If you scout ahead, Master Rendell replied, they'll see your armored knights and assume we're here for war. Let me come with you. The Jarl, well, we're not old friends, but he knows my face. That comes next, Velzen said. She looked at Ilme, gauging. We'll just ride a little ahead, and see if the settlement's occupied. If they look like they're preparing for a fight, you stay here. We're not made of glass, Xanamoron spat. No, you're my emergency artillery, Velzen said, patiently. Stay here, and if you hear fighting, make some fire. She gestured to the knights, and they set off down the trail. Xanamoron slid off his horse and sat beside the road, working at the laces of a boot. Where do you lay the odds on them needing a magic artillery? Master Unaya shifted in her saddle. Must we use the High Marshal's unpleasant nicknames? Master Indel took a palmful of runes from his pouch. Be ready to cast, and be ready to close your mouth and look thoughtful while you eat stewed fish. It could go either way. Ilme looked up the mountain again, toward up the mine. We ought to see if anyone's up there, she said. Someone should check on Zoria. Master Indel cast a sidelong look up the mountain. You probably should stay close, but the Guardian might have a better sense of how the Fremennic's temper is. I can be quick, Ilme said. Master Indel slipped the runes back in their pouch. I didn't see you go, he said significantly. The snow clung to her boots as she made her way to the rift in the rock. Other feet had walked this path, churning up the mud beneath the falling snow, but she couldn't tell how many or who. The rope they'd used in those early days had long since frayed away, a series of ladders and platforms now making a path down into the rock. Ilme picked her way down into the mine. Zoria, she shouted. Zoria, are you awake? Empty, Rue warned her. Turn around. No, Ilme said, counting down and continuing down and down. Zoria can't leave. He must be in the deep parts. Dangerous, Rue said. The rune essence mine had expanded greatly in the last 3 decades. The narrow tunnel she had followed that freckled boy down was now a path as wide as Zoria. A winding passage spiraled out like tentacles of some deep-sea squid. Deep chasms gaping beyond the walkways. The faint glow of rune essence hung around them, almost a cloud. Rue began to circle over the walks, his usual path tasting the rune essence, but he was fidgety, looping back to twine around her ankles. Zoria, her voice bounced back from uncomfortable directions, and then in the distance she heard voices and froze. Gunnar and Zoria shouting. She started running. Where the passage leveled out, a huge cavern opened wide. Ilme remembered where they'd broken into this place, how they had pushed through the stone and found a void like Falador's great hall. how they had how they had pushed through the stone and found a void like Falador's great hall deep beneath the earth. How she'd been eager to find Zoria, to lead him here where he could have so much more space to move. The Guardian had squeezed down the still tight passage at her urging, always indulgent. But when she'd seen the vast cavern, the curved dome of the ceiling sparkling with crystals and pockets of rune essence, he let out a deep, booming croak Ilme could only call elated. "This is wonderful," he said. "I had no idea this lay down here. I, who have been here beyond memory. Isn't that something?" He'd even managed to hop across it, his powerful legs launching him over the cave puddle-filled floor. Now Zoria crouched halfway across the room, his throat sac pulsing in an agitated way. Gunnar stood before him, axe in hand. "There is no path forward," Gunnar shouted. "There's no future for me. Do you not see what you've done?" "Put the axe down," Zoria said. "You're upset. This is not the time." "I asked you for help. I asked for you to stand up for what's right." How can you claim to come from Guthix and not be willing to tell me the false Asgardians they've wronged us? He didn't drop the axe. Let me just set back up the scene here. Sorry about this brief interruption. Okay, and we're back to it. How could you lie to me like that? You're nothing like I thought. "I could kill it," he told her flat out that first day. He knew how. He bragged about taking down giants. "Gunnar!" Ilme shouted. "Stop!" Gunnar turned at the sound of her voice, and for a moment there was so much hurt in his face. Ilme knew she should have followed Master Indel and King Raddallan and told him from the start. Ilme knew she should have flouted Master Indel and King Raddallan and told him from the start. But then his expression hardened into a hatred that cut her to the core. He was never going to forgive the lie. She hadn't known him as well as she'd thought. "Ilme," Zoria said, "please." The lies made him angry, but you all lie so often. "Put down the axe," Ilme said. "We can talk." "I don't have anything to say to you," Gunnar said. Rue flew loops between them. "Stop, stop, stop!" Ilme snatched him out of the air, clutched him to her chest. "I'm sorry," she said, walking to Gunnar. "I wanted to tell you." "Did you? Or were you laughing about how you duped the savages?" "Nobody duped anyone," Ilme said. "We made an agreement." "You lied," Gunnar said, advancing on her. "You knew the Jarl wouldn't trust you if you weren't from the Moon Clan." "Your father," Ilme said. "Your father didn't care who we were. He cared that we took charge of the mine and gave him weapons for his trouble." "And now he looks like a fool," Gunnar shouted. "Now I look like a fool." "If they think you're a fool, they are fools," Zoria declared. "If they won't make you Jarl when your father dies, then you should go." "Are you trying to make me kill him too?" Gunnar said. "Stop," Ilme cried. "Who is saying we should kill your father?" "Go and see what the world is full of," Zoria went on. "You are not limited." "Enough!" Gunnar howled. "Enough! You can't!" But they were all shouting over one another. Ilme couldn't make out the rest of what he said as he lowered his axe, reached across his belt for something. Ilme sizzled. She turned, and a creature stepped through a rift in the air, all muscle and horn and vicious teeth. A demon, Ilme realized. A summoning rift. Azira's whispered voice sliced through her memories. "Maybe the Moon Clan don't worship demons, but the Fremennik do. Everyone knows that." "They didn't. They couldn't." You have raised mountains and lashed demons, Jarl Viljar bellowed to the sleeping god. And here and now, when Gunnar had reached for the innocuous-looking belt pouch, a demon had appeared, as if drawn by a leash. "What have you done?" she cried. But Gunnar only stared at the demon, axe clutched in a determined grip. The creature spread bat-like wings, blocking the exit, and roared loud enough to make the cavern shake. Ridged horns curled from its skull, its red skin rippling with muscles as it hefted a wicked-looking sword. The air burned in Ilme's nose and eyes, and she backed away, one hand reaching for her rune pouch, the other pulling Rue away, pushing him towards the back of the cavern. "Demon," Zoria intoned. The creature hissed around terrible fangs, and uttered a string of guttural language, heavy with disdain. Zoria returned with a booming so deep it rattled chains draped over the demon's arm. The great frog lunged forward, jaws parted, slamming into the demon as if he were trying to swallow it whole. The wicked blade came up, slashing Zoria's slick skin, and the guardian pulled back. Ilme clicked air runes together in her hand. Fear and force of will collapsed them together as she thrust her hand towards, and gusts of wind with them. The demon threw Zoria aside, the spell narrowly missing the giant frog as they tumbled, scouring the demon's back and leaving dark lines of ichor running from it. The demon howled. It turned and backhanded Ilme, flinging her across the wet cavern floor. Her head bounced against the stone, sending stars across her vision, and she heard a tinkling sound of rune stones bouncing over the floor. Rue landed on her chest. "Up, up, up!" Her skull pounded, pulsing with a rhythm that felt like the shaking of the very earth. She let her head fall to the side and saw the demon's cloven feet stamping closer. Ilme rolled out of the way, scrambling to her feet. Her head swam. Her runes were all over the floor. She fumbled for her pouch she wore around her neck, trying to conjure a blast of earth this time. The demon lunged for her, claws snatching at the stones near her feet. Zoria slammed into the demon again, driving it from her. It reached up and sank its terrible claws into the guardian's dampled back. White foam bubbled from Zoria's slick skin, and the smell of burning flesh flooded the air. The demon screamed a sound that threatened to crack Ilme's skull as the poison left black and boiling trails across its skin. Ilme searched the cavern for the summoner, but there was only Gunnar, circling the demon, and Zoria, looking for an angle to attack. "I could kill it." "How could you possibly know him?" Xanamoran had asked. She felt as if the world were slipping underneath her. "Get away from him!" she shouted, but Gunnar was already moving, blade aimed. Runes flew straight into her stomach, runes clutched in all four her claws. "Here, here!" He let them fall, clinking to the ground. Ilme swept them up, years of study and practice letting her sort them by touch, earth, water, blood, nature. She collapsed the last willing vines to erupt from the stone to bind the demon, but the creature, burned by Zoria's poison, thrashed and twisted from the grip of the frog's jaws, and the spell missed, gnarled by roots clinging only to Zoria's foreclaws. The demon broke free, launching itself skyward, dripping ichor, one wing torn. It looked as if it were trying to escape, and then it dropped straight down on Zoria, who sat bleeding, battered, bound to the floor. In that moment, too many things happened. Ilme closed her fist around the remaining runes, choosing the fire spell that came to mind. Fear and rage burned through her, so hot and bright she might have crushed the stones physically in her grip. But the magic unlocked between her fingers, freed by the need and will, and she threw a wave of scorching earth towards the falling demon. At the same moment, Gunnar struck, leaping forward, axe high. He would hit the path of the spell. The demon would die, but he would die too, and she couldn't call it back. But Zoria pulled himself up, lunging towards the demon as if to knock Gunnar aside, and then the demon vanished, a rip in the air, swallowing it once more. The spell she'd cast over Zoria instead as the great frog sprang up. A horrible cry of pain burst out of him, the sweep of wind and sand tearing flesh. A cry broke off Gunnar's axe, came down in the guardian's skull. For a moment, time froze, and Ilme couldn't hold the idea of Zoria being anything but ferociously alive in her head. In the next breath, he would rise. In the next breath, he would laugh with relief. He would praise her quick spells and Gunnar's caution, and Rue settled on the bulk of the guardian, on his torn body, shoulder, his torn, bloody shoulder. His wings fluttered, agitated, as he hopped down the great frog towards the as he hopped down the great frog toward the axe, immutable axe. "Runes," he said. "Runes, fix it." Ilme reached into her pouch as if there were any runes in the world of in all the worlds of the gods and elves and humans that would bring him back. She felt a strange emptiness, the gap in herself that had opened when Morana had died, but this time she prodded at it, the pain and grief rushed in. She clapped her hands over her mouth, heart ripping in half as the whole other axe cleaved it. "Fix it," Rue said. "Runes, runes." "No," Ilme said. She couldn't. No one could. "Rue, come away, please." Gunnar stared at her over Zoria's still body, over the puddles of blood that slicked the cave floor, her face a mask of horror. "He's dead." Ilme squeezed her eyes shut. They should... What? Bury him? Bury him? Gods beyond, she wanted to scream. He was so kind. Her throat closed. Nothing she could say would be enough. "He's dead," Gunnar said. He looked down at his buried axe, then up at her. "You killed him." Ilme blinked, tears breaking over her cheeks. "What? You made all of this happen." Her grief froze her, hardening into anger. Are you mad?" she said. "He's dead because you... "What did I do?" he shouted, sounding as if his mind was breaking. "I trusted you, both of you. You had no care, no thought for what you ruined, and it was your spell. Don't you dare," she shouted back. He was bigger than her. He was stronger than her. He'd fought a score more terrible monsters, and she'd barely begun. But in that moment she thought her rage and grief might be able to tear runes straight from the essence in the walls of the mine, might form a wave of flames and glass and sharp edges. "You have absolutely no right to lay this on me. I lied, yes, I lied, and I'm sorry for it, but I didn't have a choice. And when you get down to it, it didn't matter. It didn't matter to you one bit. None of this had to happen. It's your axe in his skull." Her voice broke. Gunnar took a step back from her. He pulled his axe free from the great frog's skull with a hideous crack of bone. He looked haunted, the way he'd looked when his daughter had been taken. "This ends here," he said grimly. "Are you going to kill me?" Ilme snarled back. She scooped up the runes she'd let fall to the ground. The power in them surged in her hands, sprayed forth into a steam of water. Gunnar dodged around it, though, coming at her with the axe bared. Frantic, she cast again. The same spell she tried to bind the demon with. This time the vines caught Gunnar, tangling his legs and trapping him in place. He swung away, axe falling short, the anger and disgust in his eyes injury enough. "You will pay," Gunnar panted, ripping at the vines, straining at their grasp. "You will all pay. You think you are safe in your Asgarnia, but we're coming. We will have revenge for your misdeeds." Morana would have killed him there. Valzin would have too. Adelar, Raddallan even, and Del, she thought, would have heard the threat and ended it while Gunnar was trapped and injured, and at her mercy. But in her grief and panic, she could hardly hear it. He had been her friend. He had been Zoria's friend. And now... One thick vine snapped. Rue circled her. "Go," he said. Go up." This time she did not argue. She had been wrong about Gunnar, as wrong as she could be, and she was wrong about what came next. With Rue chasing her up the scaffolding, she fled out into the snow, down the road where the wizards and the Kintraw waited. Velzman met her. "There you are." By the empty helmet, why would you run off like that? The Fremnik have left, and we have to go, Ilme gasped. We shouldn't be here. Xanamaron, trying to wrestle his boot back on, scowled up at her. What? What happened? The Guardian is dead, Ilme said, and the Fremniker are riding to war. That's the end of chapter 9. What do you think? Do you think we can do one more chapter? Let me look at the index. Does it have an index? No, it just goes straight into it. How long is this chapter? Because my voice is getting a little bit tired, so I don't want my voice to be cracking the whole way through this. Oh yeah, it's like 4 pages. We can do one more chapter. Chapter 10. The 42nd year of the reign of King Raddallan of Asgarnia, the 34th day of the Ire of Phyrus, Fremnik province. Gunnar broke free of the bindings and chased after Ilme, following her footprints down the mountain slope to where they disappeared in a churn of hoof marks and strange boot prints, fleeing back to the kingdom they'd built on stolen rune essence. What would you do if you caught her? He asked himself, standing over Zoria's body. He'd been angry enough to kill her, if only in vengeance for the Guardian, that she'd lied, that Zoria had helped her, had shattered him, that she'd summoned a monster to kill the Guardian, that she'd cast her foul spells to hurt Zoria. That's interesting. That is interesting. Both Gunnar and Ilme blamed the other for summoning the demon, so who really did it? That she'd taken the demon back where he was inches from ending it, and let his blade fall. The judger that had shook his arms at his axe splitting the Guardian's skull ghosted up his limbs, and Gunnar shut his eyes. No, Zoria had already been dead. It had been another cruel trick, but he knew that if he caught Ilme running down the mountain, if he had cornered her with her runes in hand, he wouldn't have killed her. Not first, anyway. He would have asked her to explain. Nothing made sense, and if it would only make sense. He gripped the axe. Nothing makes sense, he'd admonished himself, because you have been a fool. The Woolf Clan left with no thought of where Gunnar was. He raided the stores of wood they left behind, stacked up next year higher in the hills, and brought them into the cave. He built a pyre around Zoria, stayed until the smoke started to pool in the cave ceiling, thinking of all the things he had lost. In the morning, he was a different man. The path to the winter camp of the Fremnik led down the slope of the mountain, away from the storm-tossed sea, where the earth stayed warm from the deep spring below, and they could build their settlements into caves that lined the mountain slopes. Fishing in the ice lakes, hunting on their slopes, living off the stores they'd built all summer. Gunnar reached his people a day and a half after leaving the mine, and came up to the cave hall entrance, axe in hand. A structure like the end of a longhouse protruded from the slopes of the earth, the great doors lit by dancing torches. 2 warriors stood outside the doors, Ivo and Froynia. She looked startled when she recognized him, Ivo cruelly amused. He stepped forward to block Gunnar's progress, to issue the challenge Gunnar had been prevented from giving, to declare him exiled, to just stab him and leave him bleeding on the frosty ground. Gunnar didn't care. Ivo didn't matter. As the other man came into reach, Gunnar hit him upside the head with the flat of his axe, never slowing his stride. He heard Ivo hit the ground, and Froynia moved out of his way, letting him into the winter cave hall. Inside, the structure carved its way into the hillside. It was warm and dark under the blanket of earth. The fires burning under the chimneys carved up through the mountain. All eyes watched him as he approached Jarl Viljar, seated at the high place at the end of the cave hall. "There you are," his father said. "Where have you been? Chasing monsters again?" "He's your father," Gunnar told himself. "He's your Jarl. You will give him this one chance." "The guardian of Guthix is dead," Gunnar announced, his voice catching horribly on his grief. He cleared his throat and continued, "We must prepare for war." The Fremnik turned slowly to regard Jarl Viljar, who scowled at his son. "You're not the Jarl," he said. "You don't declare war." "The guardian is dead," Gunnar said again. "Those Asgardians and their wizards did it. They only ever cared about their rune essence. The Moon Clan tried to tell you when you didn't listen. You wanted luxuries to trade and coin. You wanted luxuries and trade and coin, and now Zoria is dead." He threw down his axe. Jarl Viljar came to his feet, iron and bare, looking down on his only son with disgust. "I lead this clan," he said. "I sail its warships. I bring its bounty to Guthix to us. And now we have only your word against word of that wizards have killed the guardian in winter, no less. They are soft and weak. They are not, no matter how many times you say it," Gunnar said. "If the Wolf Clan's that soft and weak, you've let us, father. You've let me, father." This thought spat. "I should never have trusted her. I should never have called her friend. Salmon and seal and ox thumb their noses, noses at us, and nothing happens. Falcons laughing in their beards. And now, what should be soft-handed foreigners are making. Geez, this is a little bit difficult. And now, what should be soft-handed foreigners are making the wolf into fools. I have listened to you for all my days, and what do I have for it? The gift of Guthix plundered for mere weapons, my heirs and yours scattered to the storm, and now I have seen the great guardian of our gods slain in cold blood, all because you were so easily duped." Viljar stepped down to hit Gunnar across the face, ears ringing, head spinning. Gunnar didn't think. He struck back, punching his father hard across the cheekbone. It happened so quickly, there was no stopping it. Gunnar saw the moment his fist hit Jarl, the slight widening of his eyes. Ilme had been right. He had been dreading this all his days, and had convinced himself it wouldn't happen. His face collapsed, and Viljar was falling hard and fast. He stopped and hit his head, and his head struck the greenstone of Guthix, the twin of the one beside the sea. There was a dull, hollow crack, and a splash of blood. And Jarl Viljar lay still and very dead. Gunnar wanted to scream, wanted to run from the cave. First Zoria, now his father, and he couldn't take it back. He wouldn't take it back, he realized. For all he wanted to scream, to run, to bring Viljar back, if he somehow had his wish, and he could stop his father's death, he would not apologize for striking him. Viljar had pushed him one too many times, and now the world was changing, and Gunnar was the one who would steer all their paths. He bundled his grief and panic under the sureness of anger, and turned to face the Wolf Clan, his clan. They stared at him, the warriors with hands on weapons, their fire tenders wary and distrustful. Other Jarls had come to the title this way, but not in recent memory. Gunnar stepped over and set his hand upon the stone. "What Guthix has granted us all is all temporary. What Guthix has granted us is always temporary," he said. "We are frail. After all, even our strongest. My father that knew this. I'm glad he died a warrior. Though I mourn that Guthix would take him this way." He clutched and pointed the tip of the stone. He clutched the pointed tip of the stone, felt his father's sticky blood along the side of his head, where his head had struck. "I mourn that he died before he could see reason. I mourn he died before he could see our great victory. There were many times before, times that Gunnar would soon bury in his memory and never think of again, when he would listen to Ilme describing what it was like making runes, how the magic felt flowing through her, carrying part of her soul with it. In this moment, Gunnar felt something similar, something flowing through him, carried like a ship on a wave too great for it. As if the voice of the Jarl of the Wolf Clan were filling him like a spirit that wandered from his father to his son upon death. He didn't look on those warriors with fear. They would follow him. They had to. He was the Jarl, and the Jarl called not just for war, but for holy retribution. We will be frail no longer, he declared. We will retake our clans. We will sail to war. Against who? Someone asked. Asgarnia, he said. The Moon Clan warned us. They have already struck first. One of their wizards killed the guardian in the mine. He pointed at Viljar dead on the floor. And when the Jarl denied our duty, Guthix struck him down. Murmuring ran through the hall. Someone came forward with a cloak to cover Viljar, but Gunnar stopped him. No, gaze upon him. This is what comes of disregarding Guthix. We were never to have magic. We knew this, and we pretended it didn't matter so long as the Wolf Clan chose steel. We were wrong. This is why the other clans deserted us. This is why the tributes have ceased. When the spring comes, we will pacify the other clans. We will avenge the death of the Guardian and plunder Jarl Viljar allowed. We are not pawns of the lesser gods. We know the teachings. Humans were not meant to have runes. Humans are not strong or wise enough to cast magic. The Asgardians have flouted the sacred teachings of Guthix, and for this, we must wipe their works from Gielinor. That is the end of chapter 10. Leaving us with a mystery. Who summoned the demon into that cavern? If Ilme blames Gunnar, and Gunnar blames Ilme, who's really to blame for summoning the demon? It seems that Gunnar was making an effort to kill the demon, along with Ilme and Zoria. So we have three parties, all of whom, well, we don't know about Zoria. Zoria, we have no idea who they blame, but the two factions, the Fremenniks and the Asgardians, are going to blame each other for the death of Zoria, and that would be just cause for both of them to go to war. But what really happened? Hopefully we will find out in the chapters to come. At first I thought it was Gunnar, because one, he was angry. Two, we've seen Fremenniks use summoning pouches before. And three, there was a description of a pouch that was on his waist that reminded me of a summoning pouch. But he's saying that he didn't summon the demon. So, I guess we'll have to wait and see. Anyways, thank you all for watching. If you're interested, we have a playlist with the previous readings on there. And I will be putting together, I don't know, let me know if you want. I can go through and try and edit it down to have like one long audiobook. I'll just like download the streams and then cut together the audio and probably do a little cleaning up, because there's a lot of parts where I stutter and stumble and say the wrong thing. So it could be a nicer listening experience if I cut all of the times I like stutter or choke on my words or something like that. So let me know if that's something you're interested in. I'm going to head back to the Inferno. I've been able to beat Zuck on the Zuck simulator. So now all I have to do is do it for real. So anyways, Thank you all for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And yeah, that'll do it. Bye, everybody.